ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Screenwriter Mithila Gupta has always loved romance. As a young child, she was captivated by the epic, sweeping, tragic storylines in her favourite Bollywood films. She was proud she didn't even need subtitles. Her Hindi was that good. She assumed that when she grew up, a perfect prince would be waiting to serenade her and then sweep her off her feet. Outside her home in Melbourne, though, her parents weren't allowed to speak Hindi to her. She couldn't bear the embarrassment. Mithila was busy, being a teenager and trying to fit in. All this changed on a trip to Jaipur when she was a uni student, when she spent 6 weeks crying. She didn't understand why until later. And at the very beginning of her screenwriting career, she became the writer responsible for introducing the first Indian family to Neighbours. Mithila's newest creation is an SBS TV program called 4 Years Later. It's a messy, romantic, modern love story about a young couple from Jaipur who migrate to Australia after a long separation. Hi, Mithila.
Hello.
4 Years Later is such a romantic program. The lovers, show their first sparks among the dusty pinks of Jaipur, and they have this push and pull of desire and independence. How romantic a person are you?
I think you know the answer already.
I'm guessing pretty romantic.
I'm a hugely romantic, optimistic, idealistic person. And yes, that goes to like romantic, love, but to all areas of life, like career and family as well. But there is also a realist in there somewhere that has learnt over the years that, romance always has the other side to the coin. So that's definitely what I tried to explore in 4 Years Later.
And does the romance side of you, does that come from Bollywood?
Absolutely. I think it's got to. That was the access for me to my entire heritage, apart from my parents who were very busy working. So I think there's got to have been some kind of link there subconsciously. Because especially in the 90s when I was watching those films, that's what it was all about. It was love against all odds.
And in terms of 4 Years Later, how do you create characters that are so full of life like Sri is, the leading lady, shall we say?
Yeah. So really, I really believe in the saying, write what you know. So when it came to Sri, I really looked to the women, like the version of the woman I see myself as, my mother, my closest friends. There's elements of women all around me. But definitely I see Sri as a huge projection of what I would like to see myself as, which is a bolshy, headstrong woman who knows what she wants.
Yeah, Sri is very fiery, very independent. What elements of you and your mother did you put in there?
So I really wanted to create a female lead who is unashamedly romantic, but says that doesn't mean I'm not independent just because I want these things and I want to be loved and I don't want to be alone. It actually doesn't take away my agency. It doesn't mean I'm not ambitious and I don't see myself as strong enough to be alone. I just don't choose it. So that was kind of the nuance in her that I've always kind of felt in myself and have tried to explore in various ways. But it's through her that I finally found an outlet.
I want to ask about your mum. She came of age in the 70s in India. What was she like as a young woman?
So Mum was like, so I'm telling you all this from photos and stories and, what I've been told of her and probably what I project as well. But she's always been very career focused, very intelligent. And I think not, the girl that all the boys chase after. I think she's definitely created an independent world for herself where she has agency, but she's always focused on her work. But I think there's been a hidden romantic in there as well.
But in terms of, so she's, very focused on her work, very intelligent. I'm assuming as a young woman, there would have been a huge amount of pressure for her to get married at the right age as well, right?
Absolutely, hugely. Like I think even more than I could myself ever imagine. She was brought up in India and as you said, it was in the 70s and it was very much defined. The role of the woman was to find that person and start a family. But my mum was kind of against the grain on that. However, of course, outside pressure took its course and she tried it out. But yeah, her story ended up a bit different.
Initially, so the expectation, let me take a stab in the dark, was it an arranged marriage that she was expected to have?
I know for sure in my family, most of Mum's generation are arranged. So it's not even like it was a thought. It was just what was expected.
Did that suit your mum?
She tried, but no, it absolutely didn't. But, it's one of those things. I feel like if she had met the right person through that setup, it could have, but she absolutely did not. Thank you, because otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Tell me about the trying, though. Like, how many prospective husbands did she meet? How did it go?
She did it for quite some time. I don't know exactly how many, but she met quite a few people. And, back then it was kind of, you'd have this formal setup where you're there with both sets of parents and you know a bit about each other, but you're really meeting for the first time. But you do get to meet. It's not married at first sight. You don't meet on your wedding day. But, she kind of got a chance to know some of these people. And there was even one person actually who almost got to the next stage, but he ruined it for himself because he gave her a cookbook and he, great, thanks. He wrote in it, I will do you the honour of cooking for me for our lifetime. Well, that was the last time they saw each other. Okay. She still has the book though, so power to her.
So before she got to the point of meeting your dad, so she hadn't really met anyone, what did she do?
So she was studying. So she actually moved away from home to continue her further studies. She was working as an engineer, super, super, super smart, killing it, but also one of the only women in just a complete cohort of men. She was so focused. She was excelling. And so people saw her as the person that's just going to work. And literally her parents said to her, you're amazing. So she paid for both of her brothers' weddings.
Wow.
Yeah, a huge for a woman back then
very
in India.
Unusual.
And, my grandparents said to her, this is what you do. You're really good at this. Stay with us. You can support us. Keep working. Which, in many worlds, that's quite amazing and liberating.
Yeah.
But also for her, I think deep down she always did want to meet someone. So it was also like a feeling of, oh, okay, they've given up on me. So I'm just going to lean into this and I'm going to be so smart and so bad and just do my thing and work.
How did your mum eventually meet your dad?
She became really good friends with a colleague and he and his wife wanted to have her over for dinner. And she was away from home at this time. So she went along and she walked in and she said the first thing that hit her was this sound and it was my dad singing. So Dad is also a huge romantic. And so he was singing a Hindi ballad from a romantic film at the top of his lungs and actually was good at it. So she was drawn in by that. And then she saw that while he was singing, he was cooking, which how funny is that? He's not the giver of the cookbook. He's doing the job himself. And he was making this huge spicy mutton curry while singing. And she describes it as he was cooking as though his life depended on it. Like he was just putting all of himself into it. And she was just completely overcome by the sight, the sound, the smell, and this man who was just so full of life. And when I talked to Dad about it, he was like, I was told a girl was coming over. So I was cooking like my life depended.
Oh, wow. So how well matched were they?
They were quite opposites, actually. So Mum being that woman who was just focused on her work and her career, Dad was a bit more happy-go-lucky. He was the last of 10 kids.
Wow.
So he wasn't afforded much opportunity. So Dad kind of, did his best in his circumstance, but, was kind of floating through life and doing his thing, whereas Mum kind of had a plan. She was very ambitious. So in many ways they were opposites on that regard, but when it came to values and what they wanted from life and how they loved each other, they aligned. And so it was kind of a longish courtship where they were friends first, but Mum described that they kind of just always ended up having dinner at that house, staying up all night having drinks, and eventually just decided that they were a match.
How long after they got together were you born?
Actually, a really long time afterwards, which I talked to Mum about this and I was like, was I a surprise? I think they actually imagined, because Mum had already imagined a world without a partner.
Right.
And so I think as a result, she imagined a world without a child. But they eventually found each other. They had years together. So they met, I think, when she was 26. She had me at 35, which also in India was kind of unheard of. It's so late by standards back then, and in many places even now. And because I'm an only child. So I'm always like, why did you only have one? And Mum's kind of just like, la, la, la. And Dad is just like, one was enough.
One is plenty. When and why did your parents want to leave India?
So this is the cause of my greatest anxiety. It was because of me.
Right.
And I say anxiety, like there's anxiety, there's obviously joy and hope and gratitude, but there's anxiety and guilt because they had a whole ass life in India. They had a lot of friends. Mum was doing great at work. So was dad actually by then, all their family. But they just wanted to give me a different world. And once again, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but typically when it comes to opportunity, a country with a population of 20 million, whereas one of back then was like 1.2 billion, you know, the numbers kind of speak for themselves. And so they did want to bring me to a place where I would get to grow up and choose what I want to be and have some space to do that. And at that time, my uncle, my mum's older brother, had already set up in Melbourne with his 2 daughters. So he said to Mum, come here, you know, there's space here. It'll be better for Mithila. And so we came along. Back then you were able to migrate. This was 1990. You were able to migrate on a family visa. So we came here in 1990 when I was just a few days short of turning 4 years old. And yeah, I want to say we never looked back. Like I never looked back. I've definitely created my world here, but I'm endlessly fascinated by what life would have been if we had have stayed.
Where did you live at first when you first arrived?
So we arrived into Melbourne and we lived with my uncle's family. We were there for about 7 months, which was a really tricky time actually because it wasn't really our home. And while we were so lucky to be there, I think my parents were kind of in limbo. And me as a little kid, I had no idea what was going on. Like they had told me obviously, but just in terms of going from a place like Jaipur to a place like Melbourne, they're so vastly different. So I have really vague memories of it being a really difficult time, but it took about 7 months for them to kind of find their own landing. And then we ended up renting a flat in Fairfield in Melbourne. So that's where I grew up.
I was going to say, yeah, you were 4 years old when you moved. How much of that move is vivid to you?
A lot of it is vivid. I have all these strange memories. I have memories of dad cooking for me because we have really big appetites and I think bigger than my uncle's family. So we always needed extra food. And I have memories of just being, so the 3 of us slept in a bedroom together and I have memories of just being there with mum and dad and I think them talking about what's next and, you know, both of them looking for work, like a really tough time, just not knowing what the future holds. And they wanted to shield me from it, but I think as a kid you always know when there's trouble around. So I think I have absorbed a lot of that.
How long did it feel like a struggle for them in Australia? Like how long before they felt like, okay, we found our feet?
I don't know if we've ever found our feet, so to speak. They've done amazingly well. Like they've set up a beautiful life. I think, you know, they sent me to a really great high school. I think that was a huge achievement and something we wanted. Soon after I finished school, they bought a house. But, you know, that took years upon years upon years. So they've hit some milestones of achievement. But I think in terms of feeling fully at home, while we're really grateful for our place here, I don't know that they have found that in the way that I have.
And in terms of getting established in a new country when they first arrived here, how long did it take to, you know, find work and that kind of thing? Yeah,
it took a while. So mum started working as an academic. So with her qualifications as an engineer, she started working at a university. That took about a year or 2 from memory. But she's also so impressive. At the same time, she started her PhD here. And so obviously her English is fabulous, but it is her second language. So I'm just so proud to say that my mother has achieved a PhD in her second language
that's
in
incredible.
This country. It's huge. It's huge. So that took a while. And then dad, you know, through all of that, he was working, but he also tried to set up a business with 3 other men, hoping to really get on his feet and have something to call his own. But one of the men ended up cheating the 3 other men, including my father. And so that ended up a huge mess where they lost the money, had to go to court. And sadly, because of that, dad never really had his own business. He kept kind of working various jobs just to keep us going.
And what was he like as a dad?
He was emotional and nurturing, but not to everyone. Like he's got a hardness to him. Loud voice, huge laugh. you know if he loves you and you know if he doesn't. He was very open, but he adored me, adored. So I got that side of him. I got the soft side. But he used to work a lot of night shifts actually, so while I was sleeping. And he would be the person to pick me up from school and make me my snack and play teacups with me and watch the cricket with me. And so he really has always been my buddy, my best friend.
What kind of kid were you like?
There's probably two sides. Like I was really quiet. I was the kid that watched all of this happen. So when Dad got cheated out of that money, I was around 7 years old. And so I was really just like watching it all unfold and trying to be good. But also I got really cheeky because I think, you know, what goes up must come down. And I think as I absorbed all of this hardship my parents were going through, I was developing my own personality. So I was trying to be good, but I was also acting out a little bit.
In what way?
It was probably nothing, like nothing to even call cheeky, but like in a South Asian context. Like I remember at school, I got popular eventually, like really little. I got teased because I still had an Indian accent, but it started fading away and I found my place and it was a predominantly Caucasian school. And so, yeah, I just got like a bunch of friends and we used to just run around. We used to run away from home and like, I don't know, like I remember once I stole some licorice from the tuck shop. They called my parents. My dad didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. He was devastated. And this is the thing when I say anxiety and guilt about being the reason they came here. I felt like if I misstepped at all, it was like it was all for nothing. She's become a thief. Why did we bring her here? I don't even think my parents said these things. I think these are all just feelings and concepts I had internalized because of the struggle I had witnessed.
Growing up, how did you keep in touch with your North Indian heritage? Was it primarily through Bollywood?
It totally was. I would watch Hindi films. I would just absolutely escape into Shah Rukh Khan and dream of a better day and all the like.
Was he your favorite Bollywood star?
He is like my world. Yes, he's my favorite star. But he's also like, he's probably the reason why I work in film and television.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he just brought so much joy and escapism and like true swooning, like absolutely wishing for something like this, not even in the shape of a man, but just the feeling he gave.
For people not familiar with who Shah Rukh Khan is listening, how would you describe him? Like, is he like the Tom Cruise of India? Is he...
I just don't think there's a Western comparison because he is like a god in India. So he's Shah Rukh Khan and we call him King Khan because he's like not just the king of Bollywood, but we see him as the king of India. I mean, like maybe Sachin Tendulkar, you can kind of, the cricketer.
Yeah.
If you put like Tom Cruise, George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Leo, and like Al Pacino all together, maybe.
And so it sounds like you had a really rich connection to your Indian culture at home. Did that carry over into pride in your culture when you went outside the home? Like, did you feel confident in your own skin out in the world?
No. I felt the opposite. I was teased for my accent and I didn't feel like I fit in. As soon as we got here, you know, there weren't many people who looked like me at that time. And so, no. And, you know, it's really interesting. Even when you introed me and you said that I didn't speak Hindi, like I feel this shame, but I also forgive myself. But essentially what happened was all I wanted was to fit in. So when I went to the supermarket with Mum, I wanted her to speak to me in English. I didn't want to speak in Hindi. And I know I broke her heart because that same girl was like singing Dulhania Le Jayenge at home at the top of her lungs.
Right. It must have been confusing for her.
So confusing. Behind closed doors, I'm this uber Indian. And then out in public, I wanted to be an uber Aussie. And I internalized a lot of that. And I think I shed a lot of my culture and heritage that I'm so proud of now. And in many ways, my entire career is about overcompensating for the pain I caused my parents and also to myself by denying such a beautiful heritage. And a problematic heritage, but aren't they all? You know, there's the good and the bad, and I denied it all just to fit in. And I used to be ashamed of it because I blamed myself. But looking back, it actually wasn't my fault. It's the way the country made me feel. I wouldn't have been accepted if I didn't assimilate at such a young age. And it's a really complex one actually because I wish I had done things differently, but I am where I am now, so it's also a part of my journey.
Yeah. Before you got to that point, your family had a trip to India when you were still a teenager. What do you remember of that trip?
I remember being a total brat. So I was about 13, 14 years old, and it had taken about 9 years for us to be able to go back. So setting up a life here, a home here, sending me to school. A trip for 3 to India is expensive. So it took that long. And I think my parents were just like so excited to go back, see all their people, take their beautiful daughter. But I was in like the height of my assimilated phase. So I just remember being like, oh, I don't want to be here. Who are these people? Like, yes, I connected with some people because they're family and I felt like I had to. But I really, I did not make the most of that trip. I really just kind of was not open to it at all, even though I was still that person watching Hindi films in the dark by myself. Like, yeah.
Did you feel like your parents were disappointed or family was disappointed in how you were on that trip?
Yeah, I did actually. I did. And it was that thing when you're a teenager where you know the thing but you don't know how to say it. And it's like I was in this slump and I wanted to pull myself out of it for their sake, but I just couldn't.
And so you've done like all this reflecting on it since, but back when you were a teenager, navigating these two parts of yourself, how did you do that and how did you go in high school trying to perform these two parts?
It was really tough at the beginning, actually. So I went from my kind of public school, primary school, to a private girls' high school where I trained for 2 years to get a scholarship. So it was like, do something that makes money. So we were like looking at doctor. I'm scared of blood.
You'd be a terrible doctor.
I would be such a bad doctor. It's like not a good ask. But as a result, I did all the sciences and all the maths and everything. But I started leaning more into the school play and literature and the humanities and the arts. But I didn't know how to tell my parents that. And I remember talking to my careers counselor and I was like, I think I want to like tell stories. I think I want to be a writer. And she was like a journalist? And I was like, no, like make-believe stuff. But I applied for journalism, but I didn't get in. And obviously didn't get into medicine or anything. But the second tier to journalism back then at RMIT was something called media and communication, which was essentially film school. And that's where I landed. So it's kind of what I always wanted to do subconsciously, but the universe kind of got me there in a roundabout way.
And what was film school like? Was there pressure to sort of find your niche or your thing?
I had no idea what my voice or my niche was. So I just found myself doing assignments, and trying to get good marks, like being that immigrant kid that's like, I just have to succeed. But there wasn't really the heart and passion and drive behind it.
After your first year of university, you went back to India with your mum. How is this trip different to the last one in high school?
This one was the absolute opposite. I think after a year of being at uni, around like a whole bunch of other people from different walks of life, and asking myself, what is my voice? What is my niche? Like I went to India with that question in my mind. And it's not even like I could articulate it to myself, but I spent the whole 6 weeks with mum just crying. Like everyone I met, I fell in love with instantly. People I'd met before, people I'd spoken to on the phone. I was just like absolutely enamored. I remember taking a train trip with her and there was this guy who'd been in the army and he was sitting there and we started talking to him and he said something like, it must be hard to live outside of your country. And that made me cry for hours.
Wow.
Hours, just crying. And I don't even know what mum thought was going on. But weirdly, it was like I was finding this connection that I had actively denied. And it was pretty amazing, really emotional.
Were the tears, the unpacking of that guilt and shame and trying to be two people and all of that, coming undone?
Yeah, it absolutely was. But there was also so much joy because after asking myself these questions, I was able to feel connected for the first time in a really long time.
What were you connecting to or what spoke to you while you were there?
It was the feeling of being in the place I was born. But it was also being adult enough to have conversations to articulate things about myself and ask other people about themselves. It was all the stories I was hearing and realizing how close they were to my story. It was in like meeting all these people who looked like me. It allowed me to connect to myself in a way that I hadn't done before.
And as you said, your mum was like, whoa, what's happening with the crying?
Lot.
Yeah, was she confused, or was she quite happy to see you connecting to your culture in this
She
way?
was happy.
Yeah.
She was happy. Yeah. Like, we know, like, typical South Asian family, it's like, don't cry. But she never told me to not cry on this trip. I think she could tell it was really important for me and for my connection to my own identity. And yeah, like, a lot of the time I would just go off and cry a little bit on my own, but sometimes I was crying with her. And actually for the first time saying to her, like, I just feel so emotional being here. And I think for a mother who spent the majority of her life in that country, I think that was a great joy for her.
One of the things that makes me want to cry when I go home, I don't necessarily cry, but it's when I eat food that my mum has made at home. It's when I eat the food. What were you eating while you were in India? Was that emotional as well for you?
Oh, it was an emotional experience. The food is so good. And, when we do these trips, we don't get to go that often back then. So it's not about going touristing and seeing things. It's about seeing people. So we spent most of our time in homes, which meant eating home cooking. And so I had these beautiful aunties and family and people who I call grandparents and friends and all these people cooking their favorite dishes with so much love, force feeding me, like making up for the years of not feeding me, and then sitting around their table with them as they pile it on your plate and watch you eat. And they just want to love you. And this is how they do it. And
Through food.
It's through food. So it was very emotional because it tasted amazing, but also because it was being let into someone's heart.
Podcast. Broadcast. This is Conversations with Sana Kadar.
Mithila, when you returned to Australia, had you changed?
I completely changed. And yeah, I felt it. I remember going to my bestie Sarah's place for Christmas because we didn't really do Christmas, and she was like, come to ours. After her like very beautiful Aussie Christmas where we stuffed ourselves, I put on a Hindi film and her whole family, including her cool older brother,
They watched
it with us.
And what did the family think of the film? Because these are long films.
They loved it. We were stuffed full of food. We'd been drinking wine. And to this day, I talk to Sarah's parents about India. And, I remember actually her father saying to me, we've been waiting for this. It's like everyone knew, but I didn't know. And this is what I
As in waiting for you to share your culture with them?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And I've continued to do so. I remember not long after that, I had all my girlfriends over to watch a Shah Rukh Khan film. We all watched Devdas and they were like, what are you doing? This is traumatizing us. It's so sad. But it's like this switch flicked. And I was like, these people love me. They just don't know the full me. And then I shared the full me and they loved me even more. So socially, I completely changed the way I was talking about myself with boys, with friends, with colleagues, all of it changed. And also I became a bit of a, hang on, well, this isn't my fault. I didn't see myself here. I wasn't in your shows. I wasn't in your stories. Why wouldn't I want to deny this to fit in? And so I remember at uni, I was a cinema major and there was a course on Asian cinema. And there was no Hindi film ever. And I remember talking to someone who was working on the syllabus and being like, this is one of the biggest film industries in the world. And this is specifically Asian cinema. And they were like, yeah, we don't have 3 hours for a screening. Completely dismissed me because it's mainstream and Bollywood and masala film and it's not seen as intellectual.
Cinema film. Right.
Cinema. Yeah. But it's it's got billions of people around the world watching.
Yeah.
And so I fought for it. And I eventually got a Hindi film on the syllabus, a Shah Rukh Khan film, Veer Zara. So not only did I change socially, I started fighting for my voice.
And so, did you feel like, in terms of that question of finding your niche at film school, did you feel like you now had your niche?
Yeah, I became uber Indian. We had to make websites and I called mine Mollywood for Mithila Wood instead of Bollywood. And it was all henna patterns. And I just was like, this is my voice, my heritage, my culture, my longing for it and my avoiding it. All those things I was ashamed of. It's actually the parts of me that are the most beautiful.
And it's one thing to have the family of one of your best friends who all love you watch a 3-hour-long Bollywood film and love it. How did the students in your class react to the 3-hour-long Bollywood film?
It was actually really heartbreaking.
Oh.
So this is where, the story has ups and downs. And yeah, you can change, but it doesn't mean the world is changing. So this is a deeply emotional film about a Hindu and a Muslim torn apart, deeply in love, played by Shah Rukh Khan, which his face will just make you cry because it's so beautiful and charismatic. And so in all these scenes of high drama, high emotion, I'm sitting there in the cinema crying and people laughed.
Oh, wow.
So the way...
Because it was, too melodramatic or cheesy to them? Or
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea how different I am. The way I watch things is different. What I see as deeply emotional, they see as funny and melodramatic. And it broke my heart. I was like, how am I going to exist in this world? But I just realized it actually doesn't matter if they're laughing. I'm still getting the emotion I need out of it. And it just told me as a writer, I'm just going to have to find a way to communicate those emotions in a way that are palatable to a Western audience.
After further study, you landed in the writer's room for Neighbours, the iconic Aussie soap opera.
Yeah.
What was that like as a first job?
It was insane. It was a dream. It's not an easy industry to get a foot in the door. I just knew it was this amazing training ground and a place where I'd get to write and plot story and work with other writers and actually have a career in writing television, which would just be a dream. So when I finally got it, I got a 2-week placement there where I was observing, and I'd been given some advice, which was spend the first week listening and getting to know the show and getting to know the people. And in the second week, blow them away.
Good advice.
And so my way of blowing them away was to be like, this show is very white. And the greatest audience is in the UK. And there's a huge South Asian population there. And actually, people laugh at how white this show is outside of Australia. So why not put on an Indian family? And I was so lucky because the people in positions of power there had already started having these thoughts. How do we keep the show relevant? How do we expand? And they supported it and they made it happen. And so I got to work there for 2 years with the Kapoor family, obviously all the other characters as well. I couldn't just lock myself in a room and only write the Kapoor family. But yeah, it got me my place on the show as a writer and so much fulfillment. And my parents were so proud, so proud because this thing was happening that they just never imagined would have happened.
Yeah, that was also a real moment for a lot of people, a lot of fans of the show who are, of South Asian background or other diverse backgrounds. But there was some backlash and controversy that erupted from the introduction of the Kapoors. How did you deal with that?
Oh, how do you ever deal? It's the same thing in the Veer Zara screening where people laughed when I was crying.
Right.
You can let it affect you and kill you and stop your work, or you can go, okay, people like that exist. I'm going to keep them at an arm's length and I'm going to keep doing my job. So the backlash was just racism. It was pure racism. It was people saying this isn't an Aussie family. They don't deserve to be on this show. All this horrible, really, really, sorry to be rude, but stupid stuff because look around.
Yeah.
And so it kind of fueled me in a way because I was like, okay, you're not going to make this easy, but also you can't take my laptop away. And the actors are saying the lines and the editors are cutting the show and it's all getting made. So we just kept doing our job.
I'm wondering also how your family felt about the backlash because, as you said, they were quite proud to see this Indian family on Neighbours. What did they make of how people reacted after?
I tried as much as I could to protect them from it. So it's really, when you go into the online articles and read the comments, that's where the backlash really hits. And so we were reading it at work and going through it and I'd read it in private. But I tried as much as I could to not share it with them. It's that thing of yes, we all know it exists, but why make it bigger by giving it a voice? And I really wanted to keep my parents' excitement about it all pure. And to be completely honest, to this day, I don't know how aware they are of the backlash. From my point of view, they're not. I'm sure some of it seeped through to them. But for me, it was just a matter of let's celebrate this as much as we can. Why let a few people with very loud typing fingers ruin this for us?
A few years ago, your dad became sick with cancer. How did he handle that illness at first?
Oh, it was just an awful, awful shock to all of us. We have faced lots of hardship to get here and then build a life here. And then, as he was nearing the age where he would retire and enjoy the fruits of his labour and let me kind of go off and work, and, he got really sick. So it was 6 years ago he got diagnosed with bowel cancer, and we were all there's no other word for it, we were absolutely devastated.
And when COVID hit and Melbourne went into its first lockdown, you moved back home with your parents while your dad was sick.
Yeah.
But he was able to help you with something during that time. What was he able to help you with?
Yeah, he set up my whole life for me. Thanks, Dad. But yeah, no, he, so I was working in the television industry. I was freelance by this point. So I really could have gone anywhere. We were doing writers' rooms on Zoom and I was writing my scripts on my laptop. And Dad had been sick for some time. He was in remission, but it was all up and down. And so my greatest fear, I had moved to Sydney by this point for work. So my greatest fear was being in a lockdown and being away from them. So in that first huge Melbourne lockdown in March, I just flew down and I just bunked in with them, and it was about 3 months. And at that time, I was just on Hinge, the dating app. So I'd had many years of dating and it not going so well, but also some beautiful stories to keep in the bank. But he was there watching me doing all of this, because literally I was in their spare room doing Zoom dates. And
what did he make of that? Wow.
Well, he knows. He knew me by now. So he knew I was a romantic. He knew I was looking for someone. Also, by this point, I'm in my early 30s. So it's not like I'm a teenager, even though it often felt that way when it came to talking about taboo things. But it's everyone wants this chick. I was my mum, essentially. Back when the family said, you're not going to find someone, that's fine. That was kind of me. They were like, well, if you don't find someone, that's fine. You've been trying for a very long time, and had no luck at all. And so I think he was just kind of happy that I was still putting myself out there and that I'd kept that optimism alive. But eventually I was talking to someone, really liked him. He turned out to be a complete fraud, not a catfish. It's not a catfish story, but a liar and a fraud. And so I just threw my phone down and I was like, do you know what? I'm done. I'm like, Mum, I'm just going to work my butt off. I'm going to make all the TV shows. I'm going to be Shonda Rhimes and screw love. I'm not doing it. And Dad was just like, oh, come on. I don't believe you for 1 second. So he took my Hinge app and he started swiping for me, because he's a self-proclaimed face reader. Okay. I don't know if you know, but in matchmaking, in arranged marriage and matchmaking, you can hire someone called a face reader, and they can look at someone's photo and tell you about their traits and also about their luck and whether they'd be a good partner. They literally read your face. It's like a version of astrology.
Yeah.
If you believe it, you believe it. If you don't, you don't. But it kind of makes sense. We do wear our personalities on our faces. Mm-hmm. So he was a self-proclaimed face reader. So he was like, not this one, he's a liar. Not this one, he's overcompensating for something. Not this one, he has no job.
Gosh, every online dater needs your dad.
I know. Seriously, my friends were like, can we borrow your dad's services? And then he landed on Tommy and he said, I like this one. He has an honest face. Tommy is the most honest person I have ever met. And luckily his face is also hot. So I was like, okay, Dad. Okay, Dad, let's swipe on him.
Right.
So I got speaking to Tommy. And in between, so the lockdown ended. That was the first Melbourne lockdown. Went back to Sydney. I had one date with Tommy.
In person, in real life.
In person, IRL. But the next morning I woke up and Mum called and said Melbourne's shutting down again.
Yeah.
And Dad had some tests coming up. So I booked a flight for the next day. And Tommy asked me to go out that Friday night. And I said, I can't. I'm going to Melbourne. It's locking down. I'll just call you when I get back. I was like, all hope is gone. I finally meet a nice one and this has happened. But power to him, he was like, well, why don't we just Zoom? And that was that huge, hellish Melbourne lockdown.
Right.
So we Zoomed every Friday night for 5 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Once lockdown ended, what happened then?
We were just together. And Dad had gone through a really tough surgery through that time. We'd been given a really heartbreaking prognosis. And I was sharing all of that with Tommy openly. And so by the time the lockdown ended, we were just desperate to see each other and we were just together.
Mithila, your dad died very recently. How are you in your grief?
I don't really know, because truly I'm going through the best time of my life and the worst time of my life all at the same time. So celebrating 4 years later, Tommy and I just got married a year ago. It's like I feel like I've achieved so much of what I've wanted to achieve in my life, but I've lost my person who helped get me there. Mum and I are keeping each other going. I'm so grateful to have her. But yeah, we really miss Papa. He's larger than life. And like I said, so loyal, so honest. There aren't many people like him. So I really, really feel his absence.
How do you try and keep him close?
I talk to his photo and I am inhabiting the traits of his that I admire. So I've become much more honest about my feelings. I've had to let some friends go and say, do you know what? You haven't been there for me, so that's not good enough. I'm a huge people pleaser. So I've taken the just out of my sentence. I've stopped smiling and nodding. If something displeases me, I'm trying, it's early days, to express that and just be more honest. So if I'm trying to just behave, I'm trying to be those things about him that I love.
Did he get a chance to see your show 4 years later?
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah. So he only passed away about a month ago and the show had just come out. So he was in palliative care, and the night it premiered, my husband and I and Mum went and we all sat around his bed, and he was so tired by this point. Like, he was at that phase where you're really struggling to stay awake, the poor guy. But for the whole hour the show was on, he just had his eyes glued. Like, I can't even tell you the intense concentration. He got to see it, the final conversation he had with his doctor, who was lovely. She was an Indian doctor as well, and an only child, and had recently lost her father. Oh. And so she really saw her dad and my dad. And she said to him, are you feeling okay about what's happening? And he said, I worry about Pramila, which is my mum's name, and Mithila, but my daughter is very talented. And I was like, you waited till now
to tell me? Oh, my gosh.
Like, I always felt it from him. I always felt his pride. Oh. But, he wasn't the most expressive with his words. But hearing that day, I'm like, we always knew that we'd have to let him go when we found out he was that sick. And there's no good time to lose someone you love so much, but I'm so glad he got to see some of what had happened.
So you said your family has never quite felt like Australia became home. That's really sad. How come?
I think it's this kind of isolation where it's very specific. I'm not speaking for all Indians. I speak for our experience, having very little family and then working so hard that, yes, they had some friendships, but not like a huge bunch. It's when you say they never found a home or we never found a home, it feels like a very big statement. I think maybe I'm projecting a bit, and it's actually me thinking all the things they didn't have here, they had in India. But to be honest, all the things they do have here, they didn't have in India. So it really...
In terms of career and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and even like with my father being unwell, the care he got here and the dignity with which he was able to die, we're so lucky. It's absolutely amazing. And also then seeing me thrive here, which, yes, I could have done in India, but we don't know. We haven't played the sliding doors of that. But I do think there's a film in it. So I'll come back to you. But no, look, we built our home here. It was a home of 3, and now it's extended with my husband and my friends and a couple of friends that they've made. But in terms of finding like a place in a community here, we never got to do that.
I do have to ask, there's a lot of intimacy in your show 4 years later. This is so different to a typical Bollywood film. What did your parents make of that?
Well, also what you've just said is the reason why there is so much intimacy in the show. So in these depictions of love, I never saw intimacy, and it affected the way I saw my own body and my relationship to intimacy and how open I can be and how trusting I can be. And yeah, it all became so taboo. So I didn't want that for future South Asian generations. And it was actually a part of my pitch for the show. I was like, we invented the Kama Sutra, but we're not like sexy. Like, yes, we're glorified and we dance in the rain in Bollywood, but we're not like intimate and vulnerable in Bollywood. And we're certainly not intimate and vulnerable in Western depictions of brown people. Right. So I wanted to create that. So I was nervous. Mum and dad, like I said, they're the people who were the love marriage against the odds. They're the people who accepted me going to film school and arrived half an hour early. So they got it. I could tell Dad was a bit uncomfortable watching it. I think Mum was pretty proud watching it.
Okay.
Yeah, as a woman, I think she could really see. Interestingly, my uncle came to the hospital and I was like, really didn't want to talk about the show, but of course he had to tell me his opinion. And he said, it's going to be very isolating for elderly Indian people because it's very, it's real. The sex is like, it's not literally real. We used an intimacy coordinator and no actors were harmed. But it's very grounded and nuanced and not flashy and very real. And he said it's going to be very isolating. And I said that's not a surprise to me, but this is the story I wanted to tell. And actually he proved to me exactly why I needed to, because we haven't had these conversations openly with our parents and it affects how we love. And he said something to my mum about adult scenes, and I was so proud of my mum because she said they're not adult scenes, it's intimacy.
Oh, go mum.
That's a win, right?
Yeah, for an Indian mum especially, yeah.
Yeah, and then for younger generations of South Asians, I'm getting like DMs from people saying thank you.
Yeah.
And so it's for them.
There's also a fair amount of Hindi, and so I'm wondering for your mum, you're a girl who was embarrassed about her speaking Hindi to you as a child, and now you've put Hindi in your show. What did your parents think of that?
They're so stoked, so stoked. And I told Mum from the beginning, because these are all conversations we had with our commissioners before we even started plotting the show. And there were things that I wanted. I was like, I want there to be Hindi. I want there to be intimacy. All the things they loved about the show, So for me to go to my mum and dad and say, I'm putting all these things about us in the show and they actually want to invest, they were stoked. They were so stoked. And I always say to Mum, like, this is my way to say sorry.
Aww.
And of course she's like, you don't have to say sorry. Like, she can see why I was the way I was. And I think she's very proud of me now. But yeah, I will always feel like I'm trying to make up for that.
Mithila, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been so nice to talk to you too.
Mithila Gupta was my guest on Conversations today. It was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people. This program was produced by Alice Moldovan. Our executive producer is Carmel Rooney. I'm Sana Kadar. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.